Is that human or is that Google?
Human.
That's human? Oh. Because it was very fast. I guess that's like a court stenographer person.
She's award-winning.
Is she?
Yes.
She's good. Hello. See, that's almost my whole, the whole thing I'm thinking about these days, is humans creating value, the ability of humans to create value in a digital age, and what happens when the humans are replaced. Why are we replacing certain humans with technologies and not others? When is it better? When is it not? And what's the real underlying philosophy? What's the underlying drive for doing these things? When I first started to think about this, when the human receptionist was replaced by a automatic answering machine at a law firm. I was temping back in the days when no one knew how to do word processing. If you knew how to word process, you could get $40, $50 an hour for typing at night in law firms. That's what we did in the late 80s. And there was this great receptionist I was building up the courage to ask out. And she got replaced before I had the chance to do it. And she was replaced with an automatic answering thing. And it was the primitive kind where you really, I mean, going through the menus was hard. I mean, it still is, but it was particularly hard back then. And I remember thinking about the savings. And I understood that the company was saving money by having a machine instead of a human receptionist they had to pay and give health insurance. But the amount of time it took everybody else who was calling into the company got vastly expanded going through all these menus. So the total cost, the total man hours and total corporate money that was being spent as a result of the replacement of the receptionist with the machine actually went up. The law firm just externalized, it's the corporate word, they externalized the cost of phone answering to the callers, which created a kind of arms race then. Then every other company has to do that. Everyone has to externalize. Otherwise now you're paying the price of their phone machine but not reaping the benefits of having your own. So everyone ends up externalizing these things. And in the end, I thought of that, and this was counterintuitive. This was anti-Harvard Business School, anti-General Electric. I thought of that as bad business, and still do, because now the company's customers have to spend more time, the company's shareholders have to spend more time to get shareholder information, which makes them angry. The suppliers have to spend more time. So it's even, it's costing more money to the financial ecosystem, if we are allowed to use that word anymore, talking about finance. The financial system in which the company exists ends up more stressed rather than more healthy. But if we have a corporate individualistic understanding, more of a military sort of strategy for the company, then there's no other way for things to go in this kind of bastardized version of Darwinian selection, where you think that, oh, you've got to be the meanest company doing the meanest things and taking from other and all that in order to succeed. It's an infantile understanding of, I mean, we're seeing it on many stages today. You know, this a very primitive, childlike understanding of how business works. I don't blame people so much for it as our inability to recognize the operating system on which we're trying to run our companies and do our work and live our lives. So when I first wrote this book, the original title was very optimistic. It was called Distributed, a new OS for the digital economy. And what I was arguing was that we could move from an extractive growth-based paradigm to a distributive circulatory one. I mean, my shorthand, I would say rather than optimizing for growth and extraction, we optimized for the velocity of money. We optimized for the amount of transactions. So how do you really get the economy off the hard drive and into RAM when we're working on it the other way? I mean, that's sort of the underlying philosophy of this work, of how I'm seeing things. And the thing that got me the most upset, the most kind of agitated, was that developers, engineers, programmers seemed oblivious to the operating system on which their companies were running. That they accepted the underlying values as if they were pre-existing conditions of nature, rather than a very specific operating system that was developed at a specific moment in history with specific needs in mind, and that it might actually be obsolete in our current setup, and certainly in a digital age. So I would look at a friend like Evan Williams, one of the founders of Twitter, and see him on the cover of the Wall Street Journal with the number $4.3 billion under his face, which is the amount that he was worth the day of the IPO. And I would think, oh, this poor fucker. It's over. He's fucked. You know, and anybody who understands how this worked understood he was fucked, because Twitter, it turns out Twitter can only make about $2 billion a year. That's about their limit. And you would think for a 140-character messaging app, $2 billion a year is pretty good. Pretty good revenue. And you think about what you actually need to maintain that app. It's not that much, right? You use Amazon for servers, just rent, do whatever. It's not that, once you've built that, it's not that, it doesn't cost $2 billion a year to maintain that messaging. It costs a whole lot less. You could reach sustainability and great profitability. But we know that once Evan's got $4.3 billion of investor money, he's got to return $400.3 billion, $430 billion. That these are investors who, even at the IPO, are expecting 100x or 1,000x returns on a growth-based company. So now he's trapped. Now Twitter is a failure. Twitter has to do, what do they call it? It has to pivot. Twitter's going to have to pivot into being they tried, a video company, ad company, this company, that. They're going to have to pivot to something that can deliver that kind of growth. And if they don't, they get bought by Yahoo, I guess, and then Jack Ma or somebody buys that. And that's what this moment was about for me, the throwing rocks at the Google bus moment. It wasn't, a lot of people think I'm saying, oh, let's throw rocks at the Google bus. And no, I'm not saying that at all. Throwing rocks at the Google bus is this almost, is meant as a poetic metaphor for the situation that we've gotten in, for the enmity and the inability of our technology companies to actually create distributed value for lots and lots of people. The fact that Google, which, those of you who are old enough to remember, Google was two kids in their Stanford dorm room that came up with an algorithm to take down Yahoo. We all resented Yahoo in the early internet because Yahoo was using humans and judgment and values to categorize the internet. This was a man-made hierarchical system. And Yahoo seemed invincible. And then this little algorithm, the idea was that now the links that, you guys know Google, right? The links that people make are going to decide in a bottom-up fashion behaviorally how are we going to organize information. So it was this people-driven, bottom-up, democratic, populist reorganization of the world's information by how we use it and how real people think about it, rather than how some corporation decides to divvy it out in order to promote sales of things and existing worldviews and all that. They got it, right? That we're living in a kind of a tag cloud, and that this could be fun. And then what happens, though, is Google gets, we know Google gets all this investment, it becomes this giant corporation, then Google has to show a certain amount of growth. Google has to grow, and it has to grow at a weird, accelerating, giant rate. So sure, they're based not even in San Francisco, but if you're going to be a Google programmer, where are you going to live? You're going to live down near the airport, or you're going to live in San Francisco and get on the bus and go down there. And as you know, people who lived in San Francisco their rents ended up doubling and tripling because not just of Google, but all the activity that was going on there. And then Google, in a appropriate way, said, look, we're putting so much traffic on the roads and all this pollution, let's do these buses so that we can actually make it easier, have less of an impact on this community, and get more hours of work out of our people, of course, because they're going to work on the way down and on the way up with nice Wi-Fi. And what happened is that, as we know, if you're in walking distance of a Google bus stop in San Francisco, your rent is 30% higher even than it would have been. So here are these people, their rent's gone up, the bodegas are out of business, the local shops can't afford their rent anymore, and they're looking at these buses coming in as if it's an alien invasion, right? Bringing these developers from the mothership. Right? And what they're experiencing is this company is getting much bigger, but their actual lives are getting worse. They're having to leave their town. And that's why, they see the private buses on a public bus stop, their rents going up, and these people who seem to be using, and a company that seems to be using San Francisco more as a Hollywood backdrop rather than as a place that it's actually invested in. You would think if a business is located somewhere that it contributes to the prosperity of that place. But here Google seemed to be more like a foreign corporation extracting value from this place and leaving nothing there. So when people started throwing rocks, it was at an Oakland protest, they started throwing rocks at the Google bus, people were messaging me on Twitter saying, isn't this cool? Isn't this great? I was like, no, it's not great. It's like, I know people you guys do too. I know people. Howard Rheingold's daughter was on one of those buses that got stuff chucked at it. He's a writer friend of mine. And the Googlers aren't to blame. Most of the people on those buses, they just want to try to keep their jobs for 4 or 5 years before they burn out, right? You know what there's a lot of, what's the average time span for, I don't know, but it's hard. They just want, and so then you could blame you're going to blame their bosses for the way they make them work, or you could blame the CEO of Google saying, oh, look what the way Google's impact. The CEO's just listening to the shareholders who are going to sell the stock if he doesn't make the stock grow. And who are the shareholders? Some of the very same people that are lying in front of the Google bus, who have Google in their S&P 500 fund. So who is to blame? And I'm arguing that it's not a human is to blame or everyone is to blame, that we can exercise human intervention at any place along that chain, but at the same time, it's not the effortful acts of humans, but this obedience to an economic operating system that was invented by people who have long since left the building. And what I wanted to do, the project of this book, was to convince people that this is a very particular economic operating system.